Hey, everybody. Tonight, I want to discuss the speed at which the house of cards are falling in our nation's capital with speed. My name is Monica Maybank, and this is the Holy Politician Podcast. On this podcast, we discuss politics, policy, and culture through the lens of truth and holiness. As a former federal lobbyist and public policy expert, it's never been more important than now to provide a truthful perspective on public policy in a way that Christians in particular can understand. And that is what and who this podcast is for. So thanks for tuning in. If you haven't subscribed, I'd encourage you to do that right now. Press that button and then share this video with at least three people that you know. Sometimes people just need a different perspective on politics and policy. And so, what we've witnessed over the past 17 days since President Trump has been in office for the second time is the record and neck breaking speed at which the president is reshaping American public policy simply through the stroke of a pen. Since January the 20th, the president has issued at least 60 executive orders, and he's not done. The executive orders so far have primarily focused on some key things that he talked about during his campaign. The first is immigration and border security. He's implemented stricter measures to control illegal immigration, including wanting to resume the border wall construction, declaring a national emergency at the southern border. And there's talk in many communities that illegal immigrants just, they're not showing up to work. There are ghost towns in many respects in certain cities and certain stores. And it's just really interesting that these policies really have frightened people from coming out of their homes. But not only that, there are people who literally have said that their friends and family members have been deported. So this is something for us to pray about, for there to be peace in these homes, for things to be done in a way that is respectful and honorable of these people's human rights. There's been energy policy executive orders promoting domestic energy production by the president, basically rolling back certain environmental regulations, encouraging additional energy exploration. The president has said over and over again, drill, baby, drill. So this shouldn't surprise anybody. As it concerns social policies, the president has issued executive orders that ban men from competing in women's sports, which we should all applaud, ending the mutilation of minors, which we should applaud too. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. On trade and tariffs, we've heard about the tariffs that the president wants to implement on countries like Canada, Mexico, and China to address things like illegal immigration at the southern border, and then the rise of drugs coming into our country. And so some of these other nations have come to the table and said, we're going to do things like send 10,000 troops to the Mexican border, according to the Mexican president, who happens to be a woman of Jewish descent, which I think is fascinating. And then finally, executive orders on restructuring the federal government. The president's team has taken efforts to downsize the federal workforce. And he's talked about this, and other Republicans have talked about this for years, that there's just not an efficient government workforce. Now, whose fault is that? That's the fault of the government for not training their employees appropriately, but also for not doing a better job stewarding American tax dollars. So there's a government-wide hiring freeze. And so nobody's really hiring new people in many of the agencies, but also the buyouts that we've all heard about, where the president basically offered 2 million federal employees the opportunity to resign and take 8 months of pay, and they can quit tomorrow and have 8 months of pay as they, what the president and others have said, take a nice vacation. And so the president really is doing things that many have said are unprecedented or many have been afraid to do in the past, but the president is taking these things on. Federal employees initially had until today, which is February 6th, to decide whether or not they wanted to resign. To date, 60,000 federal employees have taken the offer. That's about 3% of the federal workforce. That's not a small number. But a judge just tonight has blocked temporarily his proposed buyout until Monday, when I guess there's a group of labor unions that are trying to litigate this and trying to fight it because some of the nuances and the legal language around the buyouts are unclear. And so now people who work for the federal government can think about this over the weekend and decide Monday. It's been extended to Monday now because of this temporary block. Federal employees have until Monday to decide if they want to quit their government jobs. And so that gives you, if you're a federal employee, more time to fast and pray about what your decision might be if this is something that you just have not had the courage or strength or potentially the obedience to do until today. And so I am praying that every federal employee would first have peace because I know that it has been a rocky road these past 17 days. But also, if God is prompting you to do something different in this season, that you have the courage to do it and that you continue to stand in the gap for all of your colleagues and peers that are really, I'm sure, this has caused many, many, many stressors, not only on the job, but at home. I mean, there's so many stressors that are happening and taking place, and there's lots of confusion. I feel like the president came in with a heavy fist, and that's caused a lot of confusion. And so we should have empathy for these people, and we should be praying about all of these things. And so when I say the president has been busy, he clearly has been busy. I don't know when his team is getting sleep. They are truly team no sleep, right? So we know that there's a lot going on. There's a lot of commotion, confusion. The news outlets are saying there's a purge happening in the federal government. There's a coup taking place, all of this language to scare people. And that's typically what the news does. They leverage scare tactics, which derive from the enemy, to freak people out and bring all of society into a state of panic. But we have to hear and listen with our spiritual ears. We have to see with our spiritual eyes. And the question is, well, what is God really doing? Because there are so many things that lie beneath the surface that you cannot see, both in the natural and in the spirit. So the question is, well, God, what are you doing in this hour? And how do I get myself in alignment with your perfect will? Right. So we may not agree on all of these policy issues. And on last week's podcast, I talk about how basically there is an affront on Blacks in some of these policies and why that happened and why it's happening now. But what I want us to understand is that God is at work because he's God and he's always at work. He's the master of the universe, not me and not you. And there are two scriptures that explicitly talk about this. The first is Proverbs 21:1, which says, "The king's heart is in the hand of the Lord. Like the rivers of water, he turns it wherever he wishes." So God has the heart of kings in his hand. And he turns those hearts in whichever direction that he chooses. There is evidence of this all throughout the Old Testament. And then Daniel 2:21 reads, "And he, God, changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and he raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding." And so it's God's prerogative, not ours, because he is the creator of the heavens and the earth, to raise up kings, to turn the hearts of kings in any direction that he chooses. He is the potter, and we are the clay. And so, who are we to say to the potter what to do or what to allow or how to use his vessel? It's God's prerogative. And so, I say all that to say, continue to stand in the gap, continue to pray for all of these. It's like lightning speed, right? It's like everything's happening. Our head is swimming. We can't keep up from one day to the next. What's taking place not only in American policy, but also what's taking place all throughout the world. And so we need to make sure that we're not being distracted by the noise, the news, social media, by even things happening in our own households where the enemy is literally trying to snuff out people in your homes. He's trying to snuff out your children. He's trying to destroy marriages. But we have to recognize that we are in a spiritual battle 24/7. And we cannot relax our faith. We cannot put down our armor. We have to be bold and stand strong in God's word. Back to public policy, there's two specific series of executive actions that I want to address that clearly highlight the hand of God at work and how God is working to reverse the curse that prior administrations basically just chose to rebuff God. The first is an executive action that the president signed today February the 6th, 2025. So today the president signed an executive order called Eradicating Anti-Christian Bias. And the intent of this executive order is to protect religious freedoms and address discrimination caused by our own government against Christians. And so the order requires a task force to be developed by the new Department of Justice Attorney General Pam Bondi that basically identifies and eliminates anti-Christian bias across federal agencies. It mandates a comprehensive review of practices that uphold religious liberties. And so the executive order explicitly says this, quote, the Biden Department of Education sought to repeal religious liberty protections for faith-based organizations on college campuses. The Biden Equal Employment Opportunity Commission sought to force Christians to affirm radical transgender ideology against their faith. And the Biden administration, the Department of Health and Human Services, sought to drive Christians who do not conform to certain beliefs on sexual orientation and gender identity out of the foster care system. The Biden administration declared March 31st, which happened to be Resurrection Sunday last year, as the Transgender Day of Visibility. And so this, ladies and gentlemen, is a win for the faith. So again, we may not like all of the executive actions that are coming out of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, but God is restoring truth and holiness through many of these executive actions. The second executive action dovetails off of the one that I just described, which is the executive actions that have been dealing with gender mutilation, the castration of our children, God's children, otherwise known in the community as gender dysphoria. And so Trump has issued at least 4 executive orders on this since January 20th, and they cover the following. One is an executive order that prohibits men and young boys from participating in women's or girls' sports. Schools that do not comply with this risk being deemed in violation of Title IX and risk losing their funding. One of his first executive orders reminds everyone who's been hoodwinked over the past decade that gender is strictly the definition of male and female based on biological sex, and actually replaces this term gender or takes it back to its original state of sex, which is a man and a woman, which is the way that God designed our anatomy and physiology. And then finally, the one that I want to drive home is his executive order to cut federal funding for gender affirming care for children under the age of 19. This stops the mutilation of God's children. And so this is something we all should be applauding. No more top surgeries, better known as double mastectomies for little girls. No more hormone therapy, no more puberty blockers. All of these foolish, dangerous, harmful practices have to stop for our children. And so people are up in arms about this, as one might imagine, right? In particular, New Yorkers have taken to the streets because NYU has recently halted gender affirming care for children that were previously scheduled to have these procedures take place this week, throughout the month, into successive months. So they're protesting in the streets. And among the protesters, which shouldn't surprise anybody, are celebrities, right? One celebrity in particular, Cynthia Nixon, who played Miranda on Sex and the City, is outraged. She's livid. And this video explains why.
Here as a lifelong New Yorker, and NYU is my hospital. Most importantly, I am here today as the mother of a proud trans man, as the aunt of a proud trans man. My best friend's kid is trans, and my kid's best friend is trans. Our lives are filled with the most amazing, beautiful, brave trans people. My trans kid had his top surgery at NYU, and the idea that the city is filled with young people who thought they had a place to go where they could receive the highest care, and that place has now been shut to them, sickens me.
Now, there are so many irrational and twisted and outright demonic things that she stated in that video. I, I am the mother of a proud trans man. My kid's best friend is trans. My best friend's kid is trans. So obviously they're keeping company, right? We know that there are legions of demons that stick together and they all move about the earth together in community. And so we've got this outbreak of this demonic idea that children and adults should change the gender and the sex that God assigned, that God created them for, not assign, that's the terminology they use, that God created for them, right? And then the fact that we are allowing people to be in the streets protesting this is absolutely asinine. And so when you think about the fact that she said, my kid had top surgery at NYU, her kid had top surgery at NYU when her kid was a kid. And so this is why we should be celebrating and applauding many of these executive orders that are restoring truth, yes, godliness and holiness, which is paramount if you're a Christian, but also normalcy and just biology and reality. And so this is why we have to understand, or we're not going to always understand why God does what he does. We're not going to understand his methods, why he sets certain kings in place and deposes other kings. Who he chooses to do what. That's not our business. Our business is to be in pursuit of truth. Our business is to be in pursuit of holiness. Our business is to ask God, what is your perfect will? And how can I help you to reveal and manifest that will here in the earth? We're not to ask questions of the potter. We don't question his authority or why he allows what he allows. We ask God, what can I do to be in alignment with heaven in the earth in this season? And so my prayer is that that's what all of us do as we continue to move forward in 2025. We're going to see so many other things happening with lightning speed. Stay in prayer, remove the distractions, stand on the wall for your family, for this country, for our nation, and for people's souls. God bless you. Thank you for tuning in. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit the subscribe button and share this video with 3 people that you know. Take care and God bless.